Data Storytellers, new episode, practitioner deep dive on the Data Storytellers podcast. And on the show today with me, I have Rebecca Wells. Well, Rebecca and I have been in contact since probably maybe less than a year ago. I
Yeah.
think we had an active conversation, but then you joined us in Austin in December. And I remember we had some great conversations both during the networking dinner and also on the case study sessions. I remember that first night actually with Dayon. You remember?
Yes.
That was like a really good.
Yes. He's
Really
such a
good.
force.
Yeah, I
So
know.
it was fun to hang out that night.
I know, absolutely. Like a shout out to Dayon. I actually need to catch up with him soon. Anyways, with today's podcast, we will have the privilege to explore Rebecca's career playbook, and we will zoom in on some of her highlights of her career, some stories, as well into the complicated landscape of data-driven change management and how she broke down some critical barriers. And I really enjoyed speaking with her because, in our previous conversations, because she has such great energy and really a take on the entire craft of data analytics that really resonates with me. So we kind of speak the same language on that. So I expect a very exciting conversation. Welcome to the show, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So, Rebecca, I did a quick introduction, but maybe for the audience, if you could provide a little bit of an insight into how you became a data analytics practitioner, and we can just kind of go from there and explore some of your stories.
Yeah. I didn't set out to become a data and analytics anything. I'm totally dating myself, to be fair. But there weren't degrees in data and analytics when I went to school. So I got a marketing degree mostly because I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. But I liked people, and business seemed like a good way to open some doors. So I got a marketing degree and got into the business world. I've been with Trane Technologies now for 22 years. And I was in pure business roles for the first about 12 years of my career. I worked in logistics and traffic. I spent 7 years in credit and collections. That was an interesting spot to learn about the company and grow a little bit of thick skin. Learned how to be creative in unusual ways in that role. And then I slipped into pricing, like doing tactical pricing and helping make sure we got bids out on the street. And that turned into strategic pricing. And that was kind of my introduction, almost by accident, to data and analytics. Because the role had a really heavy analytics component. But what struck me about it is that I was doing analytics, and the product teams that were really my customer base were also doing analytics. But the real hangup was the data. Because all of these people and me, we were all having to do serious hoops to get to the data. And then as I would watch presentations, as people were reporting out and doing strategy report outs, I would notice that the numbers weren't matching. And I could see for myself leading up to the strategy report outs how much time and energy people were spending getting the data and wrangling the data and putting these slides together. And then I would put myself in the seat of like the vice president that was trying to absorb these strategy reviews. And I would think, good Lord, how is this person absorbing any of this? Because it doesn't look the same and the numbers are different. And I know the data is not the same underneath. Like, how is this working for anybody? There's got to be a better way. And at the time I had just seen Tableau. And it was me and my partner in crime. And I'm like, hey, I think we can probably do this better. Like, I'm not totally sure, but there's this thing called Tableau. And I think we're probably going to need Alteryx too. And I think if we string these two things together, we can create like a data foundation that us and the product teams can pull off of. So at least we're pulling from the same foundation of data. And then we can create some of these pre-canned dashboards that make a lot of these analyses a lot faster and a lot easier. And we can create some pre-canned visualizations so that as we report out to these VPs and such, it at least has some consistency to it. And that's how the whole thing got started. Well, it turned out that I loved it. Like, I just loved it. Absolutely loved it. And I was so excited at how much easier it made my job that I started talking to people all over the company about this. And I became an evangelist sort of by accident. And there was only, I'd say maybe 10 of us that had Tableau at the time, and maybe 3 or 4 of us that had Alteryx. Well, now there's about 1,500 of us or more that each have these kinds of licenses. And wanting to learn how to do it to make my job easier became, oh, wow, I want to do this super full time. And I don't just want to be an analyst, I want to be a data scientist. And I wound up going back to school to get my master's in data science, only to figure out that I'm not a data scientist. I did
How did you
graduate.
figure that? How did you figure that out? What made you say, okay, well, this was
Oh,
fantastic, very interesting, but that's just I'm gonna keep looking.
it might have been all the crying over the code,
Yeah, yeah.
because it turned out that they weren't teaching you how to code. That was supposed to be a tool in your
Mm,
toolbox.
hmm.
And I had never had a day of code in my life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So here I was trying to pick up all these advanced algorithms and all these advanced concepts, and I was trying to use this tool that I didn't have.
Yeah.
So my
Yeah.
husband wound up switching from he was getting a master's in software engineering at NC State, but he would
Okay.
hear my statistics
Mm.
classes. I would play them out loud, and he'd be like, "What are you doing over there?" I'd be like,
Mm.
"Yeah, this is really cool." So he wound up leaving his program to come to my program. So we'd be in the same program,
Interesting.
and I'd be hiding in the bathroom every once in a while crying about some code I was stuck on. And I'd hear this tap, tap, tap on the door. He'd be like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm fine, fine,
It's
go
the
away.
code.
It's the code." And it would be something stupid. It'd be like syntax, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So like I finished, like we graduated,
Wow,
um,
okay.
and we graduated at the same time. That was May of 2021. But the interesting part about it is I came out like, yeah, I don't want to do the data science. But part of the reason I went after the degree that I did is because it was a big chunk of code and a big chunk of hardcore math, all the data sciencey stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it also had this third component that was all about organizations and people
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and what has to happen in organizations in order to be successful in DNA. And I'm like, oh, okay,
Mm-hmm.
now we're on to something, because that's
Mm-hmm.
me. Like somebody has to set the path here. Somebody has to carve the path so that people like you, husband, can go be a data scientist.
Mm-hmm.
And so we came out and from two very, very, very different angles. So I went in thinking I wanted to be a data scientist. And along the way, it took me 4.5 years to get the degree. I had decided that I actually wanted to play in all the sandboxes, meaning I started on the data and analytics path when I was in pricing. And then I moved into a role along the way where I could apply the data and analytics that I was picking up to anybody's function. Because I was so excited. I just wanted to play in everybody's
Mm-hmm.
sandbox. I didn't want to just be locked into pricing. So that was happening along the way as well. And then as I was getting that degree, I realized, hey, I don't want to be a data scientist at all. I want to carve out the parts of the organization and build this culture and basically carve the way forward so that we can do this thing for real. And so after a little bit of being in this role where I was framing the problem and working with the business and connecting the DNA back to the business, I made a jump over into actually one of the business's IT departments, which was a radical shift. At this point, I was 18 years into my career.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in that role, my job was actually data and analytics catalyst. That was my role. That was my
That
title,
wow,
which is,
that's the
isn't
actual
that
job
cool?
title.
I love
I
that
love it.
title.
I love it.
Totally.
I imagine that when you saw that, hey, do you want to be the
Right?
the data transformation catalyst? It's like, oh yeah, please.
Sure. Sign me up. I don't know what it entails. We'll make it up as we go, but sign me up, right? And so that really became like the beginning of let's write a strategy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's write a data and analytics strategy. And if you're familiar, there's a company called International Institute for Analytics.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's IIA, right?
Yes.
So I'm
Yes.
signed up for that newsletter,
Hmm.
and you told me about them as
Hmm.
well, and I think even during the masterclass we it did come up IIA,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Um, Not associated. Can you just tell the listeners a few words, because I know that this is something where, especially for data analytics, like organizational maturity assessment. I
Yes.
think that's what they do, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Hmm.
please continue. I just wanted to, if someone
Yeah.
haven't heard of them, maybe it's good to check them out.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. Um, Thomas Davenport, who wrote some of the major
Hmm.
major literature in this space, like going way back when, he's one of the founders of the company.
Hmm.
He actually wrote one of the first articles that snagged my attention that I picked up through my master's,
Hmm.
like that absolutely sent me in the direction that I went in. So he's one of the founders, and they base it around something they call the Delta model that says, okay, if you want to be successful in the analytics space, you need to get a handle on your data. You need to take an enterprise perspective. You need to work through your leadership chain. You need to set the right kind of targets to make sure you're working on the right things. And then you need to focus on your analysts, right? And one thing I've begun to kind of make peace with
Hmm.
to some degree
Hmm.
is that there comes a point in your career, and I think this kind of came up when we were in December, is
Hmm.
sometimes you're not the right person to give the message.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so having external consultants come in for me was IIA. They could say things that were tough that I
We
couldn't
assessed
necessarily
this. We
say
looked at
from the
it.
seat that I was sitting in,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
just like, here's what you need to do. And even though it was things that we had said coming from that particular organization, it worked out beautifully.
Hmm.
And so they give you recommendations and then they can set you up. They're not going to come in and do it for you. They're not set up to do that. They're truly just advisory, consultory of how you mature your organization. And
Hmm.
so then the idea is that you go forth and you start implementing these things in your organization and you come back in 2 to 3 years and you do it again
Hmm.
and you see if you've made the difference.
And we actually just
So
spoke
like
about this
the
with.
Mhm,
I think the connection might have some slight issues, but we'll see if
mhm,
I need to like swap back into like a Wi-Fi. But can you
that's
hear me?
fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we just spoke about this with Dave. You know Dave Coughlin from. We
Yeah.
just during the masterclass we looked at one of his case studies. Dave Coughlin from CBS,
Mhm.
right? It was on analytics adoption. So I don't know if you actually were there for
Yep.
that week. The one where he used the root beer example on how to drive analytics
Mm-mm.
adoption in the organization. Okay, so with Dave, we've been working together for like 2 years now. He used to be the executive director of data science at CBS. I think he came on the podcast like 2 or 3 times altogether. He wrote a book called Entry Level Escape for how to just kind of like a project that he was passionate about on advising rising stars and people who are in entry level positions and how can you like acquire skills that are complementary to your domain and make a case for your career progression and how to identify areas where you can provide value where there's low supply and high demand for certain skills. Like a really cool roadmap. And now he's with Barton Associates. He's a VP of Data Analytics, and we just spoke about this idea too. That sometimes, like just as a communicational tool, the fact that you're not pointing to your own authority, but you're pointing outside. Like for example, we work with these guys. They understand organizational maturity and key pitfalls and all that. And look, during this whole journey, we exposed some of these blind spots, and they do that kind of quote unquote dirty job for you where we need to relay this message and it needs to be received. And we were just reflecting on how even a lot of our members, when you come to a masterclass, like what they come back to the organization with is that, oh, the guys from Toyota do this, right? Or I've just seen the model from Nestle, right? And immediately that's like a different type of message. Anyways, I just wanted to mention that that's like a very powerful thing in and of itself, that there's someone else echoing the same sentiments, and it's not you.
Mhm.
Mm.
It's funny you should mention Nestle because I've used the Purina one a lot.
Oh yeah. It's a great one, and actually,
Oh yeah.
Kyle, he was also on the podcast. So I don't know if you actually listened to that conversation. It's great. I
Oh
love
yeah.
Kyle because he is like he
Yeah.
has such a collaborative mind frame, like a super
Mhm.
smart team there too. And everyone, if you remember in Austin, a lot of people are scandalized by, nah, this is impossible. You know, it's like, this cannot be
It was
right.
brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, sorry, I was interrupting you. So, you have this maturity model, Delta, so the IIA, and
Mhm.
I think you were talking about the IIA also in the context of your career journey. Of okay, I looked at this change management roadmap basically, and would
Mhm.
you say that you fell in
Mhm.
love with change management in general?
Yes.
So, so
Now I lost the audio there, so I didn't catch the
oh,
last part of
sorry.
your question.
Oh, sorry about that. So you fell in love with change management. Why did you
Mhm.
like? How did you recognize that that's actually often the bottleneck between these ideas about, oh, for example, now we're gonna become data driven. You know, they make the decision on top that we're gonna invest in this, and then change management tends to be the bottleneck. It's not that the technology is not there, it's not that there's not enough money going around. I mean, there are always scarce resources and time. I mean, that's just business realities. But still, I mean, big companies, if they make a decision, they can throw some money around, right? So, and often not even that. Often the fact that managing these big changes amidst a transforming marketplace with economic conditions, with technology booming, it really boils down to how can you capture and take kind of control of the narrative of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So, can you just tell me about your journey into like how did you realize that?
I think I was probably always well suited to spot it,
Mm-hmm.
because sort of like why I got a marketing degree, because I like people a
Mm-hmm.
lot. Um, and so I was always kind of orientated in that direction. And the further I got along in the technical journey, like I started out thinking that that was the hurdle.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very hard hurdle for me because I didn't come from a technical background in any way, shape, or form. And the further I got along and kind of overcoming it, it began to dawn on me that, oh my gosh, that's not actually the hard part.
Mm-hmm.
the it's definitely difficult, but the harder part is the fact that there's this giant chasm that exists between the people that understand the technical part and the people who need to take action from what comes out of the technical part. And there's this giant gap where people don't understand each other, and it's killing us because we can't if you can't understand each other, if you can't translate the technical into terms that the people who need to take action can understand, then nothing gets done. And I watched all of these really, really smart analytics just get put on the shelf
Mm-hmm.
for a variety of reasons because it couldn't be communicated. Sometimes we were solving the wrong problem, which was painful. Sometimes we simply weren't getting down to the root of this is what we found and this is what it means to you and this is what I think you should do with it. We weren't connecting the dots. In other cases, I was seeing that we weren't respecting the fact that analytics by definition creates change in a lot of cases. And so I started asking the question of, hey, if we do this analytics work and the data and the analysis shows that we need to move forward with some change, are you willing and open to that change? And if the answer is no, then we should probably save these teams a whole lot of work and you should
Yeah.
just do whatever it is that you've set out to do, and not have that be a threatening conversation, but let's just save the time and energy
Yeah,
and have that
exactly.
be okay.
Yeah, not the
Yeah,
right
because there is a
person,
resistance to
not the
change.
right time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So for all of these very good reasons, people in the organization who have made a whole career based on their intuition, who aren't interested in your data, and that disconnection between the technical and the people that have to take action, and not to mention just the velocity of change that everybody is dealing with. Everybody is super overwhelmed at this point, and here you're trying to force change on everybody, and and layer in just the rate of change in technology. We as humans cannot keep up with this, and that was before
Mm-hmm.
Gen AI.
Before,
So
yeah.
goodness gracious, like there's so much coming at people. It shouldn't be a surprise that the change management is a huge piece of it. And so it just seemed like this natural fit, like somebody's got to step into that space. And that's how I stepped into that catalyst role. It was like, oh, you need a translator? Well, it sounds like a job for me.
So
I could do that.
it's
And
so interesting
that's what it
because
was.
with Dave, he did recommend a book that actually I haven't, at full admission, I haven't read that book. It's called Human-Centric Design, and it's
Oh,
really
yeah.
yeah, it's really about like how to design from a human perspective. So whenever you build even like a technological solution, but actually I think it's a concept that probably scales out into urban design and all that, right? So it's a deep rabbit hole. But specifically in this area too, that when in a business, like everything is digital now. So there are digital tools all around, and it's actually your responsibility as a product builder to make it easy for the user to actually interact with, right? And
Mhm.
then this is an element of change management, but also like when people actually onboard tools and all that, the key often is the ability to storytell, to actually sell the idea to someone that this is important, and help them to understand how exactly what it will do, how it will break down key barriers, why those key barriers are important, why they need to be prioritized, so that people can actually lean into these things. I mean, they don't really owe you anything at the end of the day, right? So that's why a lot of these transformations actually get tripped up, because there becomes a bottleneck that the skills don't really match the job, right? Because the skills are really good at, let's say, hardcore academic engineering and statistical work and all that, but what will actually deliver the punch and get that job done with the translation is a completely different field, which is change management and communication and leadership and organizational design and all that exciting stuff.
Mhm. And you just touched on like so many of my favorite things right there, because it's like, oddly enough, building the dashboards, like the look and feel of dashboards was the first piece of my obsession.
Mm-hmm.
Like building something that people love to use is what hooked me.
Mm-hmm.
It
You
wasn't
got
the
there's
math, and
a
certainly
book
wasn't
called
the
Hooked,
science.
yeah, which is about that kind of design. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah.
wrote my thesis on how the human brain like
Uh-huh.
interprets short-term memory, the whole 9 yards, how we interpret things in our brain and why you do what you do on a dashboard
The
to
dopaminergic
help somebody interpret as quickly
cycles.
as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Very nerdy, but I just absolutely love it. And I made a whole case for building unicorn teams instead of looking for the unicorn, because if you're lucky enough to find yourself a true, really talented data scientist who can maybe even do the data engineering, if you're also expecting them to be able to market it and talk to people, good Lord, you're just expecting too much, right?
Hmm.
Your
Hmm.
best bet is to build a unicorn team. So somebody that has a set of skills outside your data scientist who can build you a proper user interface and build that commercialization plan around that tool. And you may or may not need somebody else to start the commercialization, which actually happens on the front end. And this is one of the things I had to learn as well, is that when you start framing your problem on the front end, you're actually starting the commercialization problem, or the
Mm-hmm.
commercialization process, I should say, because you're making sure that you understand who you're solving for
Hmm.
and that you're actually solving the problem that they need solved, and you're doing it in the way that they need. Because even if you solve the right problem, if you don't get the form, fit, and function right, if you don't get it embedded in the right workflow, the way where they need it to be, when they need it to be in that place, they're not going to use it,
Hmm. Absolutely.
right? And so, like, as I moved into an agile mindset, the more I built, the
Hmm.
more agile I got, the smarter I got about keeping that audience with me through the build process. So you can literally bake your user into the product itself and make sure you're on the right track, to just keep bringing them with you so that they're familiar with the product and you know that you're on the right track. And then by the time you get to the end, they know what they're getting, they're comfortable with what they're getting. And then for us, what we did was turn those few people that were with us the whole time into the champions that really helped us launch the adoption of the tool to the larger audience. That was a big part
So,
of
so,
how we were successful
so if
internally.
you can just so it's so interesting because this whole idea of the commercialization of analytics, it just complements so well like a project we're working on with Dayan, which is the operationalization of data and analytics, right? How to operationalize data strategies. And like all that, I mean, you've heard Dayan, like his approach to that whole question. And then so we're working on a project where we kind of just hash out this in a little bit more depth, like with the whole playbook. And I see this commercialization layer as like a perfect like counterpart slash complementary layer to that. Right. So I would love to like dive into that. And I think that's also what your playbook is. It's the commercialization of analytics. So in a very elegant way, we actually
Mm-hmm.
landed on your playbook too.
Yeah. Well, and what's I can see it more clearly now. Hindsight's always 2020. What started out as thinking about commercialization for a product became an understanding of how you have to commercialize yourself and your team and data and analytics. And then that's what really started to change my career. And I started to lean into the change management and the organizational piece. And that's how I started moving from focusing on doing the actual building of the products to starting to change the organization. And that's why I moved into like a business part of IT. And then eventually, like the role that I'm in right now, I'm the data and analytics enterprise architect in corporate IT. I mean, I would never have guessed that this is where my career was leading. But as I was looking around the organization and I was like, okay, where's the next lever? Where's the next place where I can go and start to move the needle on the storyline, on showing people and telling people and helping connect the dots for people on where data and analytics fits in and why it matters to them and how they can use it to do their jobs better, whether or not they ever even thought about data and analytics as something they wanted to do, how it helps them be better business people, how it helps solve problems and leverage opportunities. Where's that spot in the organization? Well, it's enterprise architecture right now. So here we are. So it went from commercializing a product to commercializing myself and then a team and whole concepts, and then starting to speak on behalf of all of my friends that I've grown up with over the past 10 years of doing DNA to try to help move the ball forward for DNA as a whole in this very large organization that I'm a part of.
Wow. So that's fascinating with the whole idea of enterprise architecture and how that meets data strategies and how does we can go all over because we basically with your playbook we'll have like a whole separate section too later on when we kind of hash it out. So I'm just going to jump into maybe some of those random topics that I know. How does IT fit into that? Just to like immediately like jump into a hot topic, right? From your perspective, IT often is a conversation or a subject of the conversation even during the masterclass sessions. I know that both, I think in Austin and the online sessions, it comes up, right? What is your relationship with IT? Or people kind of share their war stories with regards to IT. So maybe you can just tell us like how you guys approach this topic.
This is a tricky one. This is a super tricky one. And I'll tell you, it's been the basis of how I feel, a basis of my success, honestly, in most recent years, because I spent 18 years in the business and have just now come over to IT. And because I was on the business, the SBU side of the fence, and now I've come into corporate. So I'm a radically different voice in the space that I'm in. And that's actually been really helpful because it allows me to stand between all of these worlds, with one foot in both and with allies in both,
Mm-hmm.
and be able to tell both sides of the story. So Kathleen Maley, who's just an amazing individual, I met her through IIA actually. She mentioned on a podcast not too long ago that one of the ways she knows she's doing a good job is when the business and the analytics folks are like, whose side are you on?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I hear you, girlfriend. That's how I know I'm doing my job
What's her
too.
name? Sorry.
Kathleen Maley, she's
Um.
incredible. She's
What
just incredible.
organization?
She is currently the VP of Analytic Product, I believe, at Experian.
Oh, okay, nice. No, it's
Oh, she's all over LinkedIn. She's a force.
okay.
She's a
Yeah, no,
force.
no,
She's
very
heavily
interesting.
involved with IIA.
Okay, okay, very interesting.
Uh-huh.
So that because I
She's
like
awesome.
that thought there. That
Hmm.
when they start to question whose side are you on, okay, you're in the right spot. You are in between, the silos essentially, and you're the connective tissue.
Yep. Yep. And so like I'm still a strong component, and I say to my IT friends on a consistent basis who I adore, love you, but I don't believe that analytics belongs in IT.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
personally believe that analytics
Mm-hmm.
belongs as its own standalone function. But until an organization is ready for that, and if they're not ready for it, you don't want to be doing that. Like, you have to put it somewhere. And so you want it somewhere that is as neutral as possible,
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise all of your analytics is going to go right into whatever function it's tied to instead of
Mm-hmm.
serving the most important needs of the organization, which totally defeats the purpose of what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking for somewhere neutral and you're looking for somewhere respected. Well, IT is a pretty good spot for that. So for right now, we're exactly where we need to be. And is it optimal for the long haul? Probably not. But we have
Mm-hmm.
the support and the leadership and the visibility that we need right now to be creating sort of a centralized hub, which is what we're working on right now, to support all the people like I was, who are these scattered resources across the organization who are doing great things, but they're doing so in kind of a disconnected way.
Mm-hmm.
And they're looking for a centralized hub to churn out some of the building blocks and the strategies and the components and the training and upskilling and reskilling that the organization needs to kind of bring these pieces together and really create the scaled value that the organization is looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's happening in IT. That's why I'm here.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And
Hmm.
it's funny because we had so many stories over the past few years, and I had the pleasure and privilege to look behind the scenes in many of these big data driven business transformations. Actually, with Paul, we just reflected on the fact that in the past 10 years we worked with most of the FD 500 to like either in like a deep long-term collaboration or just kind of in, let's say, a masterclass or like a smaller project. And then I'm not sure, I don't think I can mention the company, but it's one of the biggest financial services companies in the world. Everyone knows them, so it's like one of those everyday, you see their logo every day. Okay. And we work with their VP of data science and their VP of data analytics, and very interesting conversations. And I got to see like how in that particular organization, what happened is that there are three different analytics teams. One is commercial analytics, which is more like the offensive arm of analytics, and then they have the risk analytics, which is more like I think it might be risk analytics, or might be even more tightly connected to cybersecurity and fraud.
Hmm.
Maybe I think it's fraud analytics. Yes, fraud analytics. So that's more about like defensive analytics capabilities, right? And because they're like at that level where you have literally like billions and billions and billions of transactions every single day. That's a lot of fraud, right? So it has its own analytics function. And then you have operational analytics, which is
Mm-hmm.
more about how to make sure that the organization works well. There are efficiencies found and then really taken advantage of, right, in terms of how to just basically run the company better and cut costs internally, optimize processes, identify blind spots. So three analytics, and that was a central analytics team, but that just kind of like withered away and just became irrelevant, right? So
Yep.
that happens. Right? That happens sometimes, right? So there's the risk of building, for example, an analytics center of excellence. Well, that's, like any worthy endeavor will have its own risks, and in that particular case, it actually kind of lost steam and disappeared, but it was still there formally, but it didn't really do anything. So that was the opportunity for the leader that we work with to kind of make their particular group, because they sat under one of these three, right? They sat
Yeah.
under one of these two. And I don't think I don't know if I can say which one,
Yeah. That's okay.
but anyways, it was like, okay, here's an opportunity for us to take control of the narrative, right, and step forward, because the analytics teams were a little bit competitive with each other, right? So there was no like central, and not everyone was looking in the same direction. The shared benefits and opportunities to collaborate, no one
Mm-hmm.
articulated those, right? So
Yep.
naturally, that was this like competitive session, and then the whole endeavor was like, hey, how can we initiate that kind of collaboration and then lead the
Yes.
charge on that data-driven business transformation? So it's fascinating to me when you even say enterprise architecture. Well, you got to start there. You got to make sure that how the company organizes itself is actually at the best service of the company's story, the company's narrative,
Yes.
like what the business wants to achieve, like what is that organization, what does it stand for, what is the product, what is the service, why now, like why data analytics needs to be something that's exploited as a great opportunity, but someone has to tell that story, right? So can you
Mhm.
overdo, can you have too much focus on the idea of commercialization of analytics? Is there a time when is that even like, is that possible? And maybe a follow-up question on that if it is possible, is it common?
I think I think actually, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um there's a book by Zach Gemignani. I probably didn't say that right, called Data
Mm-hmm.
Fluency.
Okay.
I love that book.
Okay. I like the term. You know me. I like
Oh,
the term data
love it.
fluency.
Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. Um, and him and his brother, actually, I think it is, wrote that book. And they talk about the pitfalls of analytics, and one of them is supermodel dashboards.
Supermodel dashboards.
Yeah, you get where I'm going, right?
Yeah.
They're gorgeous. They're slick.
Mm.
They're well commercialized, and they're
It's
totally
important.
useless.
It's important because, like, again, not to, I'm sure that there's so much to talk about. Like, one of the reasons that I have an iPhone is because the fact that it's an aesthetically pleasing,
Hmm.
smooth, human centric experience, and I'm not like fanboying out on Apple or anything, right? It's just
Yeah,
there's utility, like insane
totally.
utility in that.
Mhm. Totally. Yeah, but you can take it too far,
Hmm.
right? And his whole point is if it's beautiful and it's slick, but it's useless, you have missed the point.
Hmm.
And I have seen that, like, especially early on, like you get people, especially like with Tableau, and I was totally guilty of this, so I'm not actually pointing fingers. Like I was so excited to be building, and I was so in love with my dashboards, let me tell you. I would have sold them to anybody who would sit still. And I don't really know how useful they really were, but they were beautiful.
Okay, yeah, yeah. They're pulling people in because actually that's what, again, that's the whole philosophical conversation behind this, right? Of how what beauty does is beauty invites you in. That's what it does. It's like
Mhm,
has this power of like it invites you to explore more. So imagine like a
mhm,
beautiful European city. Often there's like a call almost in the architecture and the landscape and all that. So that absolutely applies to dashboards. And in fact, with Dave, we're having this. Advanced Business Communications for Data Storytellers series on the podcast. We just released the first one, but we have like a bunch recorded. You'll love that. And actually, like one area is specifically like, for example, dashboard design thinking, and also some of the power points. It's just the tip of the iceberg. It's like way bigger in terms of, it's really about the whole idea of business communications and partnership building, and actually being a force of nature when it comes to being able to drive certain narratives, or persuade and influence, as part of like how to reposition analytics in the organization, how to shift how the people view it. Often you have the data vending machine or report vending machine box that you can find yourself in. Like, how do you become the opposite? Like, how do you become this really cool, really powerful thing that people just love using? So that was the whole thing. That solution that Dave built over at CVS for the commercial team, for the sales team. They ended up calling it Disneyland for salespeople, the salespeople themselves, right?
That's
And that's what
awesome.
was insanely powerful, because these people became just evangelists. So then it kind of sent a wildfire of data
Yes.
science excitement. And then they had the right problem on their hands. Okay, cool. Now we have a bunch of allies, a bunch of people excited, serious people who can actually you can do something big with. Like, actually, now you have someone who's engaged, who's serious, that real commitments made in that, right, accountability and everything. So it's that's where the real fun starts.
Absolutely. Build products that people love to use.
Hmm. And what have you
100%.
found? What have you found to be like the key? And this is maybe like zooming in on your playbook as well. Like, what
Mhm.
have you found that are the key pillars of, if someone wants to, okay, I'm sold, like commercialization of analytics. I want to build things that people love. Like, what is your playbook to that? Like, what is your approach to that?
So it definitely starts very early in the process. So that was something I had missed on the front end. Lucky for me, the process saved me. I thought commercialization was saved for the back end. I thought it was about very robust training and adoption programs. Now, lucky for me, we had done a very robust job on the front end of the job, or front end of the work, framing the problem, because that's actually where it starts. Step number one is framing the problem and doing it very well. So sitting down with your audience, with your clientele, whoever you're trying to build something for, and truly understanding the problem from their point of view, and how they need to see your product, how they work, and what their workflows look like, and where your product needs to show up within their workflow for them to actually use it in the day-to-day. The second step to it is figuring out how you're going to have continued communication with them, so that
Mm,
as you're building in an agile fashion, you have a repetitive, consistent touch point with them where you can show them the progress that you've made and get feedback on it, and allow them to touch it and mess with it and play with the little controls and give you feedback on what they like and what they don't like, so that you're constantly tweaking and correcting into this framework that they are familiar with, and they are thrilled with.
mm,
That's the second piece. Then the third piece is really around that training and communication plan. So if you've done part one and part two right, you've built champions. And you can call them anything you want: champions, beacons, there's all sorts of great terms. Pick your term. But we chose champions, and actually we moved champions to train the trainers. And so these are the people that made the whole entire journey with us. And when it came to that third piece, which is all about the adoption plan and the training plan, we went all out on this piece. And we really focused on these train the trainers. We spent many hours with these folks in the tool with them, because the tool that we built was highly exploratory, and that's worth mentioning.
okay.
This was not an explanatory dashboard. This was an exploratory dashboard because we weren't set up at the time to be a centralized analytics team that could just keep answering questions for people.
Yeah.
We needed to build a tool that we could hand over to a group of very mature sales leaders where they could ask the next question and the next question and the next question and get to action and do it again.
Would you call this self-service?
Yep.
Okay, so that's what we have here. It's very important to mention because self-service is
Mhm.
one of those things that has a little bit of a mystique around it. Yeah, for
Yep.
sure.
Yep.
And different perspectives, different approaches. So actually, you had a great podcast. I don't know if you saw the one with Maddie from Fanatics. She used to work at Audible,
Oh.
and we had a good
Oh
podcast on
yeah.
that idea. I think just like a small part of it was like with this whole self-service idea. Like, how do you approach this? Like,
Mhm.
what is the right attitude here? Is it like a full free-for-all? Even in Austin, you remember in Austin, that was one of the reasons why the Nestle case study
Yep.
kind of scandalized some of the audience in a good way. By the way, a lot of them later on said that, "Hey, I
Oh yeah.
was like furious during that session, but you know what? And you know what? I started some conversation internally, and it's getting better traction than I imagined." So
Yeah.
there were
Oh yeah.
actually converts who came over to the to our side in that
Yeah.
sense. It's not like our side, but like whole idea of, okay, no, you can do that. So with this, the fact that it's an exploratory dashboard, we can just jump right back in there. So I said that was an important thing to mention there.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So it was, I mean, it wasn't just a hand it to you 2-second kind of thing. To be able to set something up so they can ask the next question and the next question, it did take a little bit of teaching and training, right? And so with the train the trainers, we spent quite a bit of time with them, and it was magical. I learned more about the tool that we built sitting with the train the trainers than I did in the hours and hours and hours and months that it took us to build it.
Mm.
Because as we were sitting with them in the very first session, like if I did the training, I drove and they watched.
Mm-hmm.
But in the second session, they had to drive.
Mm.
And these were their dealers and their account managers. So, and the way that the tool was set up, it was higher level to begin with. And then as you move left to right through the tabs, it got increasingly more detailed. The data got more detailed. So naturally, you'd land on the first kind of high level summary, and there would be some questions that would pop up. And we would be talking through the questions as they arose, and they would arrive at a question they couldn't answer on that tab. So they would move to the next one, and they would drill through the next tab, and they would get some answers, but they would undoubtedly have another question they couldn't quite answer on that tab. So they would move to the next one. And to watch this unfold in one tool, one product, but just moving from tab to tab, from more high level to increasingly more granular, was incredible. And they were looking for opportunities, like opportunities to go talk to dealers about, hey, I think you might be interested based on your historical buying patterns of moving into this particular market with this particular product. Or, hey, let's look at all of my account managers together. I see I've got one account manager that's selling significant volume,
Mm.
but look at what's happening to the margin. Is that the
Mm.
trade-off that I want to see
Mm.
happening? And I see
Very
the
interesting.
exact opposite happening here with this other account manager. And if as I step back as a sales leader, is this what I want for my business? Or maybe there was one who had an account manager that if you simply looked at the KPIs for that account manager, it looked like this account manager wasn't doing well.
Interesting.
But we had a view that really looked at month by month, laid out over historical. It was just a trend line. And we had the years stacked up in such a way that you could see the outliers, like it just popped right
Mm-hmm.
in your face. And you could exclude the outliers and it would reset all the metrics. And it happened
Mm.
to be that there was just a couple of dealers in this portfolio mix that they had some really big sort of macro events for this particular dealer. And they were such a big part of the portfolio for this account manager that it completely shot the KPIs for this account manager. And when you just removed these couple of data points these couple of months with this dealer, it totally reset the entire outlook for this account
That's
manager.
so interesting to me because I have a bunch of friends working, obviously, like, with my background, I have a bunch of friends working in SaaS sales, like big,
Mm-hmm.
the big companies.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fascinating field, by the way, and like account management in those areas. And I know for a fact that this is a frequent phenomenon. And, someone just stumbles into a big deal, stumbles into a deal that just absolutely like
Mm-hmm.
overperformed their entire year's quota,
Mm-hmm.
right, through the roof. And that person is not necessarily like, it's not that he's doing something so well that he's off the charts. It's just that was this like macro event or like an isolated
Mm-hmm.
huge deal. Because like I think sales has that element to it a little bit like poker. How
Yeah.
sure, I mean, the skills absolutely matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the same people sitting at the World Series final table of the poker championships every single year is
Mm-hmm.
the same kind of people, right? But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people lose big, sometimes they win big, not necessarily because of that. So, anyways, there is that
Yeah.
20%, right? That 20% of chance. So it's very interesting. I never heard someone elucidate that outlier question in B2B sales
Yep.
specifically. It's kind of an insight for a sales leader who's actually commanding or like managing like a larger team. This is like incredibly informative and super helpful because it's just now they can make sense of actually some of the like what works and what doesn't work.
Yes. Yes. And you can apply that to a whole bunch of things. I was in pricing, and we used to, whenever you're looking at revenue or anything of the sort, we're looking at margin over time. It's like, ooh, well, where were your price increases?
Mm-hmm.
Because we really need to kind of back some of that out, because otherwise you're all excited about something that was an isolated incident that isn't repeatable,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And you got all these people getting geared up, they're going to go do something, and it's like, wait, is that a trend? Is that repeatable? Is that systematic? Or was that just a one-time just blip that you're going to go chase yourself in circles around, and there's really nothing of substance to support you going to take action? So it's a pattern that happens all over the organization once you
Mm-hmm.
recognize it. We just hadn't applied it to people quite
Mm-hmm.
that way before we built this dashboard. And it was really interesting to watch them find it as we
Mm-hmm.
were sitting right there teaching them how to use the tool.
It's very interesting because I see how your marketing background kind of plays into that. In
Yeah.
terms of like data-driven marketing, it's like
Hmm.
measuring basically, human attention and engagement and decision making and all that in depth. It kind of wires you to be able to spot these inconsistencies, and it's a
Hmm.
business skill, right? So just
Yep.
stats themselves, statistical rigor and prowess purely won't get you there.
Nope. You're right. Who knew that marketing degree would come in handy?
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is really cool. So we actually looked at three different because I was taking, as always, I'm a pen and paper guy, so I like to take some
Me too.
notes. So it has just something about the tent, like the that you can hold
Hmm.
it. It has a sound. It has a smell, a
Oh
feel.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's an important, again, user, almost like user-centric design here too.
Hmm.
With this one was that instead of like early in the process, so that training adoption programs don't need to be bloated, so you can actually like save on, no, just get early in the process. And then there was this whole idea of the workflow design and the continued communication. And the third one was basically now the training and communications piece designed
Hmm.
around that properly. You mentioned agile a few times during this podcast, and it's something that's like, again, we talk about it a lot in the community. We're actually working on, I don't know if you remember Pete Scherf from Swire Coca-Cola. We did a
Yeah.
podcast before. It's one of our most popular episodes. Pete is great. Like, he's just so good. And we're actually working on a project with him on his specific approach to like agile, because he's, again, his thing, his career playbook is how to build high performance teams. How to
Mm.
build high performance teams. So the same that we had with Taya, but from just a different angle. And he is a huge agile proponent, and he has a very cool take on that too, on what is agile, how they are using agile, how as a leader how you should approach agile. So in your case, are we talking about agile with a capital A or agile with a lowercase a, as you know sometimes people talk about that?
Definitely lowercase.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just we're just getting started with it. We're trying to transition from waterfall to agile,
Hmm.
and I'll tell you, it's personally hard for me
Hmm.
because the perfectionist in me wants to make everything pretty before I show it to someone, and it is so hard to
Heartbreaking to put
show.
something out that
Gosh,
you're
it's
not
hard.
100% okay with that. I'm the
Oh,
same, by the way. I'm the
it's
same.
painful,
Yeah, and sometimes
but
it's
it's
just
so
necessary.
beneficial.
Yeah, exactly, exactly,
It's
exactly.
so much better. It's so much better if you build it with them. You get such a better product at the end, and it is something that they're so much more likely to use and adopt
Hmm.
if you approach it that way. There's just no getting around, the outcomes are better if you approach it from an agile fashion. And I know that there's a ton of like really formal process around it. That's why I say small a, because about
Hmm.
the only part I really, really, really adhere to is the like there needs to be a 2 to 3 week sprint where you are making sure you touch back with that customer or that audience to ensure that you are still on the right track
Yeah.
and that you are course correcting when you still have small adjustments to be making so you don't get to the end and have a giant product that nobody wants to use.
Mm. So this is so important because that misalignment it just happens all the time. So
Mhm.
first of all, why do you think that that misalignment happens if you don't touch base? Like, why do you think it's so crucial?
I think that goes back to our chasm problem.
Hmm.
Um, it is remarkable. It is the same thing as speaking two completely different languages. I'm utterly convinced of it. I think there might be 15 languages in the mix here. When you've got technical people and you've got business people, business people often don't know how to. They don't even necessarily know what's possible,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so it can be hard for them to articulate what they really want from a product. And so then you have technical people who don't understand the business processes, like truly don't understand the business. And that's one of my things that's helped me a lot is coming from the business. I truly understand a lot of these business processes,
Hmm.
but that's very uncommon. So then you have technical people who don't understand business processes and are trying to bridge that gap and assume that they know what these business people need. And so you're already coming at it where there's a giant chasm of not aligning in the understanding. And by the time the technical people are done building the product, if there hasn't been any touch points in between, especially if the business people haven't been able to touch it, play with it themselves, like tweak the little drop downs and play with the filters and actually just get in there themselves and play with the functionality and ask some questions and intuit for themselves what it's saying to them and what they can glean from it, you're going to almost always wind up with something that's off the mark because there's just not that way to get the empathy and to understand what the business people really truly need. They don't know how to tell you, and as a technical person, you don't know how to intuit what they need.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So
Mhm.
that's so with agile with the small a two. So it's almost like sometimes you do need the lower a. So you do need actually a system. Taya talked about it in the podcast, right? They use agile with us with a lowercase a, because her particular approach of okay, no, this is a team of people. My priorities are such, and then thinking about the team flow, thinking about basically how engaged people are in this whole process. So when you're driving this, where have you experienced the biggest resistance to change? And maybe you have some stories around that too.
Hmm. Boy, I tell you, the biggest resistance to change have been in people who have been making decisions based off intuition their whole lives. and aren't interested in data-driven approaches. That's been part of it. The other one is people who have been doing analytics like in spreadsheets and things their whole lives and don't appreciate the fancy tools.
Mm,
That's been another really big one. Another one is in people who are just afraid of the technology, who just kind of feel threatened by having to learn something new.
mm,
And that one has probably been the most fun for me to overcome, simply because it's sitting down with someone and helping them overcome something like that is something that comes really naturally to me. I could be very, 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 very patient and make something very non-threatening
plus
in
you
terms
can
of,
even your journey with data science,
yeah,
right, that helps to, I mean, it's not that you would have of all people an issue with like empathizing. I don't think that you have that personal pitfall, but if it's possible, maybe that experience deepened your appreciation of the
oh,
of the challenge.
totally.
Because actually, like working, especially if you're a business person and you're good at what you do, then your plate is already full. Like you're already
Yes.
operating at the limit of your capacities, right? So now there's something new. So it's not even like something that you can blame people for. It's just a reality, and overcoming that is actually your responsibility in a way if you want
Hmm.
your product to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got to sell the benefits. Like you have to show people what's in it for them and how whatever you're doing today that takes you X amount of time, I'm going to give you this tool or this product that's going to save you X amount of time. It's going to improve your results by this. And I'm not asking you to just blindly trust me. I'm asking you to come with me. Give me a shot. Let me show you this. I'll do it with you. And it's got your data in it. So we can look at it together and you can call me out if I'm wrong. But let's go look at it. Let's go see what we find together and you can tell me if I'm full of it or if I really have something here and this is a useful tool to you. And most of the time, if it's that third bucket where they were just a little bit afraid of the technology, we can overcome that.
Hmm.
We can get there.
That's not a problem. That's not
Not
a
a problem.
problem. So that's interesting that you're kind of describing some of these archetypes of why someone would be hesitant slash unwilling to adopt. So one was that they've been making decisions based on intuition all their lives. Then the second group, they'd like to do their analytics on spreadsheets. They don't like the fancy tools. Then there are people who feel threatened by the technology. Are there any others? Um, Other archetypes? Or that's like three main buckets.
Those are the three that I've encountered. I'm sure there are others. Those are the
Hmm.
three that I've directly encountered.
Okay, so maybe we can just look at each a little bit closer. You already talked about the third one. It's like, okay, well, if that's your hang up, then no, we can sit down and it's just all about patience. Any other keys for success in that area? If you are aim to, what is your approach to doing this? How important it is that your team is on board with this too, and they understand, they have the same attitude, the same approach. Like, how does that look like for you guys?
And when you say your team, you mean like my team or their team?
Well, no, so I mean, actually, your team. If you work with people and peers, right,
Hmm.
who you're doing this with, then in that sense, actually, are you like what is a team structure in terms of you driving this? In your case, what are we talking about? Like, how many people do you work with, and in what capacity?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one because at the time when I did like the major commercialization of the
Mm,
product that we've been talking about, I worked on a team of about three or four of us.
mm,
We were a small outfit turning out a pretty big
mm,
product at the time.
mm,
It was all of the sales leaders in one SBU, one business unit. Um, and we handled the commercialization and we built it, we framed the problem, we built the whole thing, we built the commercialization, which also included some really heavy duty, like very cool infographic training materials and training videos and we called them cheat sheets that you could print
mm,
and like put up at your desk and all sorts of stuff
mm,
at that time. So there was a small group of us. That was during COVID. That was an interesting time. At one point, I was the only one standing because everybody was ill. It was really wild. Um, at this point in enterprise architecture, I'm a one-woman show.
Okay,
So
there you go.
I'm influencing
You're
teams
just
of
okay.
delivery folks.
Amazing.
Yep. In the new world that I'm looking to move into, I don't know how big the teams will be.
Okay, yeah, that will be.
But one of the really big pillars of the team that we're working on is an enablement team.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it is the crux of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily going to be so focused on the direct commercialization of a product as it really is about enablement and commercialization of data and analytics as a whole. And it's not going to be framed that way. But if you were to step back and really look at what this function is going to be doing, essentially what they're doing is commercializing and lifting up data and analytics through like a community manager kind of role that hits
Mm.
fairly high level. So it does like office hours, Tableau hours, Alteryx hours, like all of these community types events. We just had a giant analytics summit, which was a
Wow,
huge success
amazing.
put on by this team. And then you have like a whole series of specialists that get one-on-one with people and they help them solve one-off problems as they're building, whether that be building a product or they are trying to commercialize or they're trying to frame a problem in DNA or they're trying to build out some sort of process, a prioritization process, an intake process, lifecycle management process. These people can climb in with individuals and help them do that across the organization. And then we actually have like formal trainers that are going to be lined up. And those
Mm.
people we're actually going to hire people who have training skills instead
Okay,
of
there you
trying
go.
to put it on top of somebody else who already has a day job.
Oh, that's
Super
awesome.
excited about that.
Yeah.
And they will create formal training content to help people use our enterprise wide tools, to help people with their data fluency, to help people with things like commercialization, to help people that are trying to sell the concept of DNA and understand the concept of DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So you have like individual teams who will be working on commercialization, and then you have like broad enablement teams from the corporate function on down that will
Mm.
be trying to enable DNA as a whole, commercialize DNA as a whole. That part I'm pretty excited about.
Wow, that does sound super exciting. And
Yeah,
okay, so there's a few questions there. You remember the case study from Isaac from Memorial Sloan
I
Kettering Cancer
do.
Center? Okay, so that's what they did, right? They actually came on the podcast too, and basically that's what they did. They got to a point where that data, they actually called it the data literacy, and this we can talk about that too. Like, what is your take on the whole question of data literacy versus data fluency, right? But before we do that, so the data literacy program, it was built by an educator, not
Mm-hmm.
someone who was a data
Yes.
scientist. Uh, so first of all, what did you think about that
Mm-hmm.
particular case, and then what is your like attitude towards the concept of data literacy, the word of data literacy? Like, is it data fluency for you guys? Like, how do you like to talk about it?
I loved that study by Isaac, and that was resonating in my brain ever since he talked about it because it was like, yes,
Mm-hmm.
we cannot keep treating people like unicorns and expecting them to keep doing all of these things that are so not in their wheelhouse in terms of skills. We need to actually pull in people that have deliberate skill sets to create some of these components that we need in DNA. And training programs 100% fall into that space. I mean, even when we did all the commercialization stuff, we went to our marketing teams. Hello. Like we went to the people who really had the expertise on marketing external products to customers to figure out how to back into an internal commercialization approach. It makes sense, right? So I thought that was super smart. And I loved their very deliberate
Oh,
approach. And we
oh
are
yeah.
actually doing something on a smaller scale. We're doing something similar.
Mm-hmm.
to help our leadership understand the data and analytics space in a real way for them. And then for your second question, the honest answer is, I don't care. Whatever you're comfortable with, whatever term is going to help you admit me into your heart, that's what we're going to go with.
I love this. This is the first time that someone answers it that way, and then because I love it because your answer is like neither here nor there, but in a way that's not a cop out, but it's kind of like the opposite. No, it's like you're hitting the money, like it's just you hit the spot there because as the whole idea that whatever will work for that person, and if
Yep.
that person is built so that, as you said, but what will find a way into your heart, I'm happy with. And it's almost like
Yeah.
whatever idea I might have, I don't really care because it's not important.
Yeah. What works for you is what's going to work for me. It's
hmm Okay, no, that's really cool. And then, so with data literacy as well, and the training programs that you guys are planning internally. So, what do you think about? Because I know that we're coming up against the 90-minute mark here. So I'm really enjoying the conversation. We could probably
me too.
continue forever, right? I don't think we could.
Mhm.
There was so much to further explore from the playbook, but I'm very happy with what we managed to cover so far. This is so exciting, and I would love to further explore that. And fortunately, we're already like 30 minutes over originally, uh, but we kind of knew that it's going to happen. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll have a part two of this podcast. But you and I are definitely working on some exciting things also
Mhm.
behind the scenes with TDS. So Rebecca, this was fantastic, and we managed to cover a lot, and yet so much left to be covered. So thank you very much for coming on the show. This was
Yeah.
fascinating, and we'll hope to have you back soon.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks for having me.